When winter emergencies strike Amish communities, there's no 911 to call. Prayer becomes their first response to life-threatening situations most modern people can't imagine facing. These 10 desperate prayers, spoken in German during crisis moments, reveal faith tested by brutal cold and genuine danger. Lost in blizzard prayer. Whiteout conditions can transform familiar roads into deadly mazes within minutes. When an Amish traveler realizes they've lost direction in a blizzard, with visibility reduced to arm's length and temperature plunging to dangerous levels, a specific prayer gets spoken, not shouted into the wind, but quietly, firmly, in German. The prayer asks God for direction home, for protection from freezing, for the horse to find its way when human senses have failed. It acknowledges complete dependence on God's mercy because human ability has reached its limit. The traveler continues moving, trusting the horse's instinct while praying constantly because stopping means freezing to death within hours. This isn't theoretical danger. Amish communities remember members who died in blizzards, caught between home and destination when storms struck faster than expected. These deaths teach children why the blizzard prayer matters, why they must learn it before traveling alone. Parents teach this prayer to children before they're old enough to drive buggies independently. The words get practiced during safe travel, so they come automatically when fear threatens clear thinking. Survivors describe supernatural calm that descended when they surrendered completely to God's guidance. Fire, emergency prayer. Amish homes, heated by wood stoves and lit by oil lamps, face constant fire risk. When flames break out during winter, the situation becomes immediately life-threatening. People pray while running toward danger, while organizing bucket brigades, while pulling children from burning buildings. The prayer acknowledges that property may be lost, but pleads for lives to be spared. What shocks outsiders is the gratitude expressed even during the fire. Thank you, God, that we're together, that no one is trapped inside. The prayer prepares hearts to accept total loss while fighting desperately to prevent it. When barns catch fire with animals trapped inside, men pray while running into smoke and flames to release horses and cattle. The prayer asks courage to face danger, wisdom to know what can be saved, and acceptance of what cannot. After fires, when families stand in snow watching everything burn, the prayer shifts to gratitude. Thank you that we're alive. Thank you for the community that will help us rebuild. This immediate gratitude in the face of total loss demonstrates faith that modern people struggle to comprehend. They truly believe that material loss is temporary, that life itself is the only irreplaceable gift. Water crisis prayer. When wells freeze solid and hand pumps become useless during extreme cold, Amish families face genuine crisis. Water isn't convenience, it's survival necessity. Without it, cooking becomes impossible, animals begin dying, and basic hygiene disappears. The frozen well prayer asks God for provision while the family takes practical action. Men pray while pouring hot water down pump shafts, trying to thaw frozen pipes buried deep in frozen ground. Women pray while rationing remaining water, calculating how long they can manage before the situation becomes desperate. Children are taught to pray and conserve simultaneously. The prayer includes confession that perhaps they didn't prepare adequately. It asks forgiveness for not insulating better, for not heeding warnings from experienced community members. This humility during crisis prevents blame and maintains family unity when stress threatens conflict. Most powerfully, the prayer asks God to provide through neighbors. Within hours, community members often appear with water containers, offering to share their unfrozen supply. This isn't coincidence to the Amish. It's direct answer to prayer, God's provision coming through human hands exactly when needed most. Child lost in cold prayer. Few situations create more desperate prayer than a missing child during winter. The child who wandered from the house during play, the teenager who didn't return from visiting neighbors, the small one who slipped away unnoticed. When parents realize their child is missing with darkness falling and temperature dropping, they begin praying the most desperate prayer they know. The entire community mobilizes immediately. Men organize search patterns, women prepare warm drinks and blankets, but everyone prays continuously, desperately, asking God to preserve the child from freezing, to guide searchers to the exact location, to protect from injury. The prayer acknowledges that children have died this way before, that time is critically short. Search parties pray while calling the child's name into darkness. They pray at decision points when they must choose which direction to search next. They pray when hours pass without success and hypothermia becomes certainty if the child isn't found soon. When children are found alive after hours in deadly cold, the community attributes survival directly to answered prayer. When children are found dead or not found at all, the prayer shifts to acceptance of God's will, trust that the child is with God, and asking for strength to endure the loss. Childbirth complications, prayer. Winter births without hospital access create situations where prayer becomes the primary medical intervention. When labor goes wrong, when bleeding won't stop, when the baby won't breathe, Amish families pray with life or death intensity that modern people rarely experience. The midwife prays while working, asking God to guide her hands, to give wisdom beyond her training. The father prays in the next room, forbidden by custom from being present, but hearing everything, feeling utterly helpless except for prayer. The mother prays through contractions and fear, trusting God with both her life and her babies. Community women gather to pray together, sometimes all night when complications are severe. They pray for the mother's strength, for the baby's survival, for the midwife's skill, for acceptance of whatever outcome God allows. These prayers acknowledge that childbirth can end in joy or tragedy, that human control is limited. When mother and baby both survive difficult births, the family considers it direct miracle. When one or both die, the prayer shifts to grief and acceptance, asking God for strength to endure unbearable loss. The community surrounds the grieving family with continued prayer, practical help, and presence that says faith persists even when prayers aren't answered as hoped. Horse injury prayer. A lame horse during winter travel creates immediate danger. Stranded miles from home in bitter cold, an Amish family must pray while assessing options. Walking could mean freezing before reaching help. Staying with the disabled horse means slowly freezing in the buggy. The prayer asks God for passing travelers, for the horse to recover enough to limp home, for supernatural protection from cold that kills. This prayer gets spoken while unhitching the injured horse, while examining the injury by limited lantern light, while calculating how long they have before frostbite and hypothermia become irreversible. Children huddle under blankets in the buggy while parents pray and problem solve simultaneously, their faith and practical action working together. The prayer specifically asks for other Amish families to pass by, for help to arrive before danger becomes fatal. Community members traveling the same roads often report feeling unexplained compulsion to take specific routes at specific times, then finding stranded families exactly when help was needed most. The Amish attribute these coincidences to God answering desperate prayers by moving people into position to provide rescue. Historical stories of families freezing to death when help didn't arrive in time make this prayer desperately real. They're not praying about theoretical danger but remembered tragedy, knowing that prayer doesn't guarantee survival but remains their primary resource when human resources have been exhausted. Severe illness prayer. When high fever or pneumonia strikes during winter, without antibiotics or emergency rooms available, Amish families turn to intensive prayer. Parents stay awake all night praying over feverish children, combining herbal remedies with spiritual intervention, believing both are necessary and neither is sufficient alone. The prayer asks for healing while accepting that death may be God's plan. This theological tension creates anguish. They want their child to live desperately, but they trust God's wisdom more than their own desires. The prayer expresses both pleading and submission, both desperate hope and ultimate acceptance. When illness becomes critical, the bishop visits to pray specifically over the sick person. The entire community learns of the situation and begins praying individually and in groups. This prayer network activates quickly. with dozens or hundreds of people asking God for the same healing, believing that corporate prayer carries special power. The prayer continues whether the sick person recovers or dies. Recovery brings intense gratitude prayers, thanking God for mercy and healing. Death brings prayers of grief and acceptance, asking God for strength to endure loss and faith to trust His purposes, even when they cause unbearable pain. Either way, the community continues praying with and for the affected family, demonstrating that prayer isn't abandoned when answers come differently than hoped. Economic crisis prayer. When an Amish family can't afford winter fuel or adequate food, desperate private prayers get spoken. Parents pray after children are asleep, confessing their fear and need to God, asking for provision while feeling shame about their situation. These prayers happen in whispered German, hidden from children who shouldn't bear the weight of adult fears. The prayer asks for specific help, money for coal, food for the table, fuel for lamps, but it also asks for humility to accept help, for courage to acknowledge need, for wisdom to know when to reveal the crisis to community leaders who can coordinate assistance. Pride makes these prayers difficult. Asking God for help means admitting human insufficiency, confronting the gap between self-sufficient ideal and desperate reality. What happens next seems miraculous to those praying. Within days, sometimes hours, community members arrive with donations. Firewood appears on the porch. Money shows up in the mailbox, anonymous and untraceable. Food gets delivered with no explanation of how the giver knew about the need. The Amish attribute this to God answering prayer by moving hearts and organizing provision through human hands. The prayers shift to overwhelming gratitude when help arrives, thanking God not just for the physical provision, but for the confirmation that they're not forgotten, that community will catch them, that faith in God's provision was justified even when circumstances seemed impossible. Death during winter prayer. When death comes during winter, Amish families pray through their grief while making practical preparations for burial. The prayers begin during the dying person's final hours, asking for peaceful passing, for the family's comfort, for acceptance of God's timing. They continue during the vigil as the body lies in the home before burial, prayers of grief mixed with gratitude for the life lived. The prayer for strength to dig frozen ground is practical and spiritual simultaneously. Men pray while breaking through frozen earth to create grave space, asking God to help them honor their dead properly despite winter's resistance. The physical labor of winter burial becomes act of devotion accompanied by constant prayer. At graveside, the prayer acknowledges the pain of separation while expressing faith in reunion beyond death. The brutal cold during winter funerals reminds mourners of life's fragility, making the spiritual promises more precious. They pray for the grieving family, asking God to sustain them through loss, to prevent bitterness, to maintain faith despite the ache. The prayers continue long after burial. The community prays for the widow or orphans, for adjustment to new reality, for God's provision for practical needs that death has created. This sustained prayer support prevents isolated grief, wrapping mourners in spiritual community that carries them through darkness toward eventual healing. Spring survival prayer. The final weeks of winter bring their own desperate prayers. Supplies run low, patience wears thin, illness has weakened bodies and spirits. The prayer asks for endurance, for mild weather to ease the burden, for spring's arrival to end the relentless hardship. This prayer acknowledges exhaustion, the weariness of constant cold, the strain of months without relief. It's honest about struggle, about reaching the end of human strength, about needing God's help to persist through final bitter weeks. The prayer doesn't pretend faith makes winter easy. It admits winter is hard and asks for supernatural strength to endure. The prayer also asks for continued provision as stored food runs low. It requests protection from late-season storms that can be deadliest because everyone's defenses are worn down. It pleads for community members to have enough to share, for no one to go hungry in winter's final stretch before spring gardens begin producing. When spring finally arrives, the prayer transforms into pure gratitude. The survival prayer becomes thanksgiving prayer, acknowledging that they've made it through another winter because God sustained them. The relief is physical and spiritual simultaneously, confirming that faith was justified, that endurance was rewarded, that winter always ends if you can just hold on long enough. These prayers reveal faith tested by genuine hardship rather than comfortable religion practiced from safety.